Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. You have tuned in to The Killer Tea, a podcast hosted by two best friends with a proclivity to decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers.
Welcome to episode 1 of The Killer Tea, where we're going to be talking about David Parker Ray, the Toybox killer.
We are your hosts, Christina and Chelsea, and for the next 60 minutes, we are going to be the bringers of the bullshit.
Trigger warning, trigger. If you are a survivor of sexual assault, this episode will feature content including rape, torture, bestiality, all the big guys. So if you can't handle any of that, I would highly suggest turning off this podcast.
Ray was a serial rapist who kidnapped and tortured his victims. Agents believe he was also a serial killer.
They think he may have killed dozens and dozens of women. But for 15 years, investigators have failed to find a single body.
Ray boasted in his writings that he was responsible for 40 victims, but no bodies have ever been located.
David Parker Ray was born in November of 1939 to Cecil and Nettie Ray. He was born in Belen, New Mexico, and his father, Cecil, was known to be a violent alcoholic and would often try to bond with his son by showing him violent, sadistic pornography.
And this was all before the ripe old age of 15. So he was being exposed to this as a young
child.
Teenager, preteen.
I think that this had to have actually been before he was 13, to be completely honest.
Yeah, so I have the timeline in front of me, and my notes say 1949, his parents were divorced, and around that time, that's when his father showed him some BDSM porn.
So he would have only been 10.
He would have been 10 at the time. And just since we're talking about this BDSM porn, full disclosure here, guys, there's nothing wrong with BDSM as long as it's healthy and consensual. And
agreed.
We don't want to paint a negative picture about that subculture. There's absolutely nothing wrong with two consenting adults doing the damn thing.
However,
none of this has to do with consent.
No, none of this was consensual whatsoever.
So Betty Page was a rather prolific pinup model, and her kind of queen of bondage reign was in the 1950s. So I'm kind of guessing that the BDSM that he was exposed to, those
may
magazines,
have been some Betty Page. So getting back to his mother, there is not actually that much known about Nettie, but it's suspected that she was a drug addict and that she left Cecil after the violence got to be too much and took the kids to live with her sister, who was also not a positive influence.
Yeah, so my research said that the kids went to go live with the grandparents, and occasionally the aunt would watch them. And when she watched them, that's when she would abuse David.
Yes.
Though whether or not that's 100% accurate, I don't know. That's just what I found in my research. But yeah, they partook, or I should say he was subjected to
masochism.
Yeah, from before he was 15.
Yes.
So he was exposed to the magazines and then the actual physical assault.
Yes.
By his aunt.
The research that I found said that his aunt began sexually abusing David, forcing him to have sex with her, and that she would make him hurt her for her pleasure, which is masochism. And fun side note on the psychology behind masochism is that some psychologists hypothesize that this is a complex form of escapism in which the participant endured pain to escape whatever they're going through. So possibly taking on the care of her niece and nephew may have been too much for her, and it was suspected that she was also a drug addict and that she likely projected her problems onto David in the form of abuse.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go off on a theory here, and I think that abuse ran rampant throughout his parents, his grandparents.
Oh, absolutely.
I think this was something that at this point has been passed down from generation to generation.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I think that abuse runs rampant in their family, and I'm not sympathizing with David Parker Ray, but Jesus Christ, how was this kid supposed to come out normal in this situation?
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Just segue with me real quick here. Chelsea and I believe that the existence of trauma greatly impacts the way the human brain develops. And when trauma is introduced to a developing brain, it can basically create a Molotov cocktail of fucking bullshit and psychological abnormalities. And you know what? That fucking sucks, because maybe shit would not have happened the way that it does in these victims' lives and even the serial killers' lives had that trauma not ever happened. So I'm also not saying that childhood trauma plus mental illness equals serial killer. I'm just saying that we would be remiss to pretend that it hasn't played a role or created impact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not every serial killer was abused as a child, and not every abused child becomes a serial killer, but there definitely is some connection there. And I think it all really depends on how the person that was abused kind of handles their abuse going forward.
Yeah, something that Chelsea said to me earlier was nature loads the gun and nurture pulls the trigger.
Yes.
Which I happen to agree with full-heartedly. So, in conclusion about this guy's childhood, we had basically every damn box that you could check, this dude had it checked. At home, he was abandoned and neglected and abused and molested, all of that stuff. And then at school, he was bullied.
And he was bullied in school for his stature and for being so shy. And his public persona did not match his inward thoughts. The sadistic thoughts that he had towards women and his linking of sex with pain, started at a very young age. But there was a study done by Jackie Milsom, Anthony Beach, and Stephen Webster. And it was found that outward shyness is not uncommon in rapists who murder their victims.
It's always the quiet, shy ones, man. Every fucking time.
And they interviewed rapists, killers, and non-killers and found that rapists who killed their victims showed increased levels of grievances against women in childhood.
Oh, yeah, that's a fucking shocker.
Increased levels of peer group loneliness during adolescence, and increased view of self as a victim in adulthood. Which I thought was very interesting.
So I did my own research, and what I found was that people who were psychologically abused as children that eventually became serial killers were usually violent sexual torturers. So y'all need to be nice to your kids and stop being douchebags. Just throwing it out there.
From my notes, that around the time that they moved in with their grandparents is when David began showing a big aptitude for mechanics. And he also started keeping a journal that detailed his sexual fantasies. And this started as early as the age of 10, from what I found. He would journal his thoughts, and especially when he liked a girl, he would journal what he wanted to do with her.
He supposedly took his first rape and murder victim when he was 15 years old.
Yes. Well, he had his first consensual sexual experience with a girl who pretended that he was raping her. Mm-hmm. And he detailed it in his journal that he had tied her to a tree in the woods, and that's where they had sex.
Can you fucking, at 15 years old, man?
And then the next year is when he took another 15-year-old girl and raped her.
So if we're to believe his journals, his first crime started, or his crime spree started while he was still in school. He didn't do well in school.
No.
Averaged around like D's and C's, and he had trouble with truancy and drugs and alcohol as a teenager. But he did graduate, got his high school diploma, and then he eventually went on to join the Army where he became a mechanic in the Army and was active duty over in, where was it?
At the end of the Korean War, he was stationed in South Korea, and there aren't a lot of journal entries from that time, but it is suspected that he took advantage of the lawlessness of South Korea at that point and probably continued raping and torturing.
If I had to guess, that's probably where it escalated and became...
It could be.
That's just my guess. But really, there isn't anything about his military career that raises any red flags.
No, he was honorably discharged, and that was that.
So he's in the military. He gets out. He has a few successful jobs as a mechanic. He starts his own business with a friend named Billy Bowers. Him and Billy are in business for quite some time, for several years. They've got a great relationship. And then for whatever reason, Billy decides that, he's ready to separate and leave the business. And this does not go over well at all.
No, this infuriates David.
And it's never really discussed why. I don't have any information as to why it angered him so much.
Billy must have known something was up because he did instruct his employees and his family that if he was to go missing, they should contact the authorities right away.
Oh, well, and sure enough, in 1988, Billy goes missing, and then in September 28th, 1989, his body rises to the surface of the...
Elephant Butte Lake.
Elephant Butte. I kept wanting to call it Elephant Butte. It's definitely not Elephant Butte.
It's definitely Elephant Butte. There's
it's Elephant Butte. So that body rises to the surface, and, he was never convicted of that murder, but... No. Everything kind of pointed to him, and there's some more information on that we'll get to a little bit further down the line. So now at this point, supposedly he is picking up, raping, and potentially killing about 2 girls a year.
Yeah. According to his journal, which kept a pretty detailed list of his crimes, he would note the year, the location, the age of his victim, and he would keep notes on their levels of attractiveness and what he did to them. However, he did not note their names, and he did not say what he did with them after. So that information was never there, and that really didn't give the authorities much to go on.
Well, but it makes perfect sense because David Parker Ray didn't give a flying fuck about women. He called them packages. Yeah. They were material things for him to use and dispose of. They were tissues. Yes. They were absolutely nothing to him. So why would he have to keep track of their names?
That's very true.
He only cared about how he was able to use them, their physical appearance, all of that stuff. Those were the only things that he cared about. I didn't really find anything on his type other than...
I don't think he had one.
It seemed like most of the girls were young and attractive.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I got out of it. He targeted vulnerable women. Yes. And this happened mostly near Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And yes, that is a city name. Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. He would tend to target drug addicts, women who are sex workers, basically vulnerable women.
Yeah, so his modus operandi was female sex workers, drug addicts. He would incapacitate them, kidnap, torture, rape, and then either release or kill. That was kind of his system and what he did. Most of his victims were in their early 20s, yes. And they were friends of his daughter, which I guess we need to talk about that bitch. Okay, so Jessie Ray, or Glenda Jean Ray, which was her birth name, was the daughter of David Parker Ray and his first wife. There really isn't anything of note going on in this first marriage, except for the fact that supposedly he told his first wife that he had killed someone as a teenager, and she didn't do anything about it whatsoever. And she just thought, oh, he's just going through some shit. Listen, honey boo-boo.
If your husband tells you he killed someone, God.
You put on a nice happy smile. You say, okay, baby, that's real sad.
And then you take your ass to the cops.
Then you go to the fucking cops so fast. You pack up your chitlins, all your things and you leave like a fucking thief in the night. You don't hang around for a few more fucking years and a few more kids.
We should also note that with this first wife, he had a son.
He had a son?
He had a son, and he abandoned that son and left that son with his mother.
He introduced his daughter at a very young age to his
sadistic lifestyle, much in the same way that his father had introduced him to it.
Yeah, so while she knows that it's illegal, she doesn't realize how the level of fucked up it is.
Yeah, she knows that it's illegal, but she doesn't realize that it's wrong.
Or so she claims.
Well, so she claims.
So he's groomed his daughter to be essentially the perfect bait.
Yeah.
Jesse would go to this, what was it, Blue Water Saloon? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, Blue Water Saloon.
With some friends from high school, people who trusted her, and she would dose them. Once she dosed them, they would find a way to get the victim back to the toy box, and supposedly she would just let her dad do whatever the fuck he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Supposedly that was the end of her involvement.
I don't know how much I believe of that.
I'm calling fucking horse shit.
But, that's according to her.
That's according to her. And actually, I have a theory about Jessie. And my theory is that she's full of fucking horse shit. I think that she was a killer. I think that she knew all along that her dad was raping and murdering people. And maybe these girls that she helped pick up, he was raping them and doing what he was doing, and she was the one fucking killing them. Because the correlation that I'm seeing is these are all her fucking friends. Cindy is David Parker Ray's girlfriend, was actually fucking Jesse's friend.
See, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I heard that she was a friend, but Cindy had moved to the area with her boyfriend. They were both drug addicts. And then they had split up, and that's when Cindy met Jesse, and they all just kind of started hanging out together.
Yeah. Cindy met David Parker Ray because she had some drug charges, or maybe theft charges, I can't remember, some petty crime that she had to do public service for.
Right.
And she was at the Elephant Butte Park doing her public service when her and David crossed paths, and then because she was friends with Jesse, they started hanging out.
And then Dennis comes into the picture and starts hanging out with them as well, and they all realize that they're all into some sadism and fucked up shit.
So, I mean, I very well and honestly believe that they all had this like little ring going.
Oh, I mean, David even admits that there were other people involved, but he never names them.
Cindy, she came from a fucked up place as well. She was raped and molested by her uncle when she was 11 years old. There was drugs running rampant in her life. She was transient. She's all over the place in abusive relationships. And she was abusive. She was known in their friend circle and Jesse's circle of friends for beating the shit out of her boyfriends. They used to joke and say that she was 100 pounds of straight muscle.
Right.
That she would beat the shit out of girls, twice her size. She was a very aggressive person. And her and David were like a match made in fucking hell. That, I've read that it's very hard to find your serial killer soulmate, but he seemed to have no fucking problem finding people who were just as messed up as him.
No, didn't seem to have a problem at all. So we should probably talk a little bit about why he's actually called the Toybox Killer.
Dozens of women were taken into David Parker Ray's Toybox, a trailer-turned-torture chamber in Truth or Consequences.
David Parker Ray had a 22-foot trailer that he called the Toybox. This was equipped with all sorts of torture devices, pornographic pictures. He called it the Den of Satan, Den of Satan, Den of Satan, Den of Satan.
So the Toybox Killer, even though, again, we don't have any technically confirmed kills, he does have the name the Toybox Killer because he invested a life savings of $100,000 into building a soundproof trailer that was essentially a toy box of fucking horror.
Think of a tractor trailer, a semi-truck trailer. That is what he got. And he soundproofed it and basically stuffed it full of torture devices, many of which were of his own design. So whips, chains, pulleys, spreader bars, surgical blades, saws. And then the probably worst thing he could have invented is he took a gynecological chair and ran electrical cords through it so that he could electrocute his victims while they were strapped to this bench.
Most of his little heinous inventions that he was creating were gynecology based.
He had a lot of medical textbooks that would help him torture women in just horrible ways.
Even though this man had what we surmise to be an average IQ, he was very intelligent. There was no official testing done on his IQ, and he didn't do well in school and all of that stuff, but he was extremely smart, and he was smart enough to take some of this money that he had been saving up to invest in medical supplies to keep women alive in order to endure his torture. So this guy wasn't an idiot. He was very meticulous, well thought out. It blows my mind.
Well, what's crazy to me is he would kidnap these women, right? And drugging them was a big part of what him and Jesse did in order to get these women there. So he would take these women when they're unconscious, strap them to this bench, strip them, and then play a tape for his victims, which I think I heard it was like an hour long.
40 minutes long. That's what
40
I heard.
minutes
Something
long,
ridiculous.
something close to that, where he would literally just talk to them about all the horrible things that he was going to do to them.
Hello there, bitch. You're going to be kept trained in a variety of different positions.
In 1986, David and his daughter Jessie get into an altercation where she gets pissed off and decides she's going to report him to the FBI.
And according to what I found, the FBI was stunned by the level of information that she disclosed about David's homemade torture devices, sadism, the kidnapping and rape of young women. But she was very vague with her statements, but it was enough for the FBI to at least launch an investigation. Wow. But unfortunately,
little good was done there.
No alleged victims were found, and David was brought in for questioning, and he was surprisingly cooperative and told them all about his BDSM lifestyle. He never confessed to any crimes, but basically told the FBI every detail of his life aside from the kidnap.
Yeah, he was so manipulative that he was able to, because BDSM is a subculture, that he was able to pass this off and say, look, this was all consensual. That's just part of the culture.
Right.
It's part of the fantasy. It's not real.
He was very popular in the BDSM underground out of Phoenix, I believe, Arizona. And so he was able to pass all of this off as if, everything was consensual, and that he made and sold these sex toys and showed them the P.O. box that he did his business out of and everything. And since the FBI was unable to find any evidence of wrongdoing, they basically just had to close the case.
And he later bragged in journals that he had actually picked up 2 women while he was
under investigation. How the fuck do you kidnap and torture 2 women while you're under investigation by the FBI? What? This is mind-blowing.
So the thing that you have to understand about this guy is that he was considered handsome in his youth by other people, by his co-workers and friends. He was considered friendly and trustworthy. He was the first person. Yeah, he was the first person to want to help you. He loved to share information and educate others on mechanic things. Like for all intents and purposes, this guy was a decent guy.
Who'd have thought?
Who'd have fucking thought?
But you know what, though? I tell you, this is why I hate charmers. Mm-hmm. This is why my hackles go up every time some guy is super charismatic and super charming. I'm like, you're a fucking murderer. You're going to take my skin off and wear it later, aren't you?
You're going to make me into a lamb.
I just know it.
I don't want to be a lamb.
I don't want to be a lamb.
So we've learned a little bit about what his pre-crime phase it is kind of like. He does a lot of planning. It's very meticulous. He goes for marginalized people. He goes for sex workers, people that the police really aren't either going to be, checking on
They're
or
not
looking
going to be
after.
looking for people whose families may not necessarily be looking for them.
Yeah, I guess it's important to note that where they live in New Mexico is a very transient place, so people come and go all the time. And that's another reason why, when any alarms were rung, that the police were like, they're sex workers, they travel around. And so even though good, honest effort was put into finding these missing people, sometimes it just got overlooked because of the kind of profession that they were in or the fact that they were drug addicts. But that is specifically why he picked those girls.
Right. Do we want to talk about his process?
Yeah, let's talk about his process.
Okay, so we touched on this. His daughter would help him get people. He would strap them to the table. He would play this tape. And it should be noted that he took photos and videotaped this shit. So he had all of the stuff set up. And he would often, oh my God, I can't even with this. He would often allow friends and his dogs to rape his victims.
Yeah, he introduced bestiality to the whole thing.
Fuck, man. Like you couldn't just rape them. You had to introduce bestiality. That just makes my stomach turn.
Next level fucking
like what
douchebag.
The fuck, dude. And I heard that he had a mirror on the ceiling so that his victims could watch.
Which is amazing because they were... So he doped them with sodium pethylol, which is a central nervous system depressant and a general anesthetic. And then I'm going to butcher this one. Phenobarbital.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Look at you.
Which is used to treat fucking seizures and some surgeries. But this combination can, once it's put together, can last several hours to days, and it creates an effect of amnesia.
Right.
So the fact that they were able to be conscious at all, to use the bathroom and all of that stuff it's just mind-blowing.
Amazing.
And not only that, but like frequent doses of this cause you to get addicted to it. So essentially, the reason why he was able to release these women was he was fully confident that none of them was going to remember any of this. And he actually said that in his pre-recording, was that he let them know he's going to do every horrible thing imaginable to
and they're
them,
not going to know what happened.
And they're not going to know what happened. He keeps them there for
days.
It's not a short thing. It's not a couple hours. It's not even a day. It's days.
Days to weeks.
Days to weeks, and sometimes he lets them in the house, and other times he keeps them in the toy box. He had a fur-lined coffin that he would store women in, or cots that could slide underneath.
I heard that at one point he would actually have two women at the same time, and he would leave them in the coffin or the cot, and they would be able to hear the other woman being tortured and unable to help her or do anything about it.
He has doped them up so much that he's able to just leave them on the side of the road.
Dump them wherever he feels like it.
Yeah, he dumps them wherever. They're just left to wander until somebody helps them or finds them.
Well, there's also the note that he worked for the Elephant Butte State Park during most of this time, and that was a very, very remote state park.
And he knew every inch of it.
So he knew every inch of it, and no one would question him driving all over the state park since he was an officer of the state park. And so I'm sure he knew all the good places to dump bodies. I mean, we're talking mine shafts, the desert, ravines, not to mention the lake itself, which is a man-made lake and is huge.
And, well, that's exactly what he did. He utilized his ability to be able to have access to all those places, and specifically the lake. So with his mistake with Billy was that he shot him in the head and threw him, I think he was chained and all that stuff, threw him into the lake, but a year later his body rose to the surface. So what he learned from that was to disembowel his victims, fill their bellies with rocks, and then throw them into the lake.
And I should note that I don't think this lake was ever searched.
Well, so I listened to the documentary, and the documentary said it was searched multiple times.
Oh, okay. I couldn't find anything saying that it was searched.
Yeah, there was a lot of conflicting information.
There really is a lot of conflicting information with this guy.
But, I mean, regardless, no remains were ever found.
No, not one single body aside from Billy, and he was never convicted of the murder of Billy.
So after the disposal of the body, we have the post-crime phase. And what happens here is he enjoys the videotapes and photographs that he took during the time that he was torturing the women. However, unlike a lot of serial killers, he was able to enjoy them, but then he would dispose of them by burning the photos after a short period of time.
Yeah, he didn't want to keep too much evidence of what he had been doing laying around.
On September 30th, 1995, Jill Troya's mother reports her missing after 24 hours of not seeing or hearing from her daughter.
The Albuquerque Police Department has an open case on the disappearance of Jill Troya, who was last seen at the Frontier Restaurant in Albuquerque, the end of September to the 1st of October, between that time period in 1995. She is a missing person. We have strong suspicion that David Parker Ray had something to do with her disappearance.
And she was last seen with none other
Jessie
Ray at the good old Blue Water Saloon. And that I think she was 21 or 22.
Yeah.
And then the next name, who is, again, we don't have really any information on her other than just her first name, was October 25th, 1995, and her first name was Connie. She was visiting with a friend from Australia to the Albuquerque, New Mexico area.
Right.
And at some point in time, she crossed paths with Ray because they found a 2-page letter written about her in Ray's possessions. So she's been missing for all this time, and their only guess is that it had to have been Ray.
Well, there's also not rumors, but speculation that if he didn't release the women and he didn't kill them, that because he was so close to the Mexico border, he may have sold them to sex traffickers, which honestly could also explain why there is no bodies. So we have 3 victims left that we know about.
Yes, that we know
that
about.
We can talk about. So should we talk about Kelly?
Yeah, Kelly's the first one.
Kelly Van Cleese was her married name, but Kelly Garrett is what she went by. And David, this is actually what started leading to his biggest downfall. Yeah, David videoed her torture, and how she got picked up is she had been fighting with her husband and went to the good old Blue Water Saloon where she met up with Jessie. And she had known Jessie
since high school.
And so she trusted Jessie. Well, Jessie drugged her beer and took her to David's trailer. And she was drugged and tortured over several days.
Kelly went out on July 25th, 1996, and she was reported missing the following day by her husband on the 26th, 1996. He was actually told by a supposed friend that Kelly left the bar with a man to cheat on him. And this friend had ulterior motives because she had a crush on him. So not only could Kelly's disappearance have been completely avoided by this friend had she run any sort of interference, but the police could have been notified sooner. The husband could have been told the fucking truth. And maybe, just maybe, David Parker Ray would have been caught in the act and Kelly could have been saved. But I digress. So Kelly's husband reports her missing after 24 hours. And the cops don't do anything because standard procedure says that they have to be missing longer than 24 hours for that to happen. She's an adult. She's well within her rights to go missing if she wants. She could have just run off, which is sad, but unfortunately that's just how this works. During this time that David has her, he's not able to perform for whatever reason. We don't know. It's not described. But he gets frustrated and gets tired of it, so he dopes her up beyond imagination, throws her in the car, and decides he's just going to drop her off somewhere. During this time, he stops at a gas station to refuel and get some things from the convenience store inside, and Kelly kind of wakes up. She's not fully coherent. She's still in a drug daze, and she wanders out of the car. Well, we had mentioned before that David Parker Ray has a job at the state park, and he wears a uniform that is kind of like an officer's uniform. So she stumbles into him where he realizes she has no idea what's going on and plays the fucking hero, tells her he'll take her back home, puts her in the car, goes and drops her off at her mother-in-law's house where he plays the fucking hero to the mother-in-law. And yeah.
But here's the interesting part for me. So because David dropped her off at home, her husband did not believe her claims of not knowing what had happened to her. He thought that she was off having an affair and actually filed for divorce, kicked her out.
This all happened within a week.
Yeah. I mean, what the hell, that poor girl. So she picked up and she moved to Colorado, not knowing what had really happened to her until the police got in touch with her a few years later.
Yeah. So in between her assault and then when the police got a hold of her, the FBI would eventually get a hold of her, and you'll find out why. But in between that time, on July 5th, 1997, Marie Parker was last seen at the Blue Water Saloon with her ex-boyfriend, Dennis Yancey, and, of course, Jessie Ray.
Allegedly, there is video that David took of Dennis killing her. Mm-hmm. She tried to leave the relationship because it was abusive, and Dennis wasn't having that.
Yeah, so on July 5th, 1997, Marie Parker is last seen drinking with Dennis and Jessie. On 2 days later, on the 7th, the mother of Marie Parker reports her disappearance to the police. And then you find out on the 8th that Marie Parker was actually tortured for 3 days and is strangled to death by Dennis, which he later claims in court he was threatened by David Parker Ray that if he didn't do it, he'd fucking slit his throat.
But he did, he got, 15 years, was it?
Yeah, something like that.
Which, 15 years for strangling your girlfriend?
And videotaping it.
I'm sorry, that just...
Ugh. So at this point, these are the confirmed kills that we have. Billy Bowers and Marie Parker.
Yep.
Those are the only actual confirmed kills. Now, there's 2 suspected kills, 2 other ones, so 4 in total, which is Jill Troia and Connie.
Correct.
So altogether 4, but none of them have been tied to David Parker Ray at this point.
Next victim we have then is Angelica Montano, I think is how you say it. And she actually partied with David and Cindy. She was friends with them. She knew them. She hung out with them. She was a big part of the party scene that David and Cindy were also a part of. And she went to David's trailer where he lived to pick up cake mix. She was kidnapped, tied up, and was tortured for, I believe it was 5 days. Now, Angelica, she was a smart little cookie. She pretended to enjoy the torture that David was inflicting on her, and I have read that this greatly confused him. And he wasn't sure what to do, and it's reported that she said that she had enjoyed their time together, but she really needed to get home to her sons. And so he cleaned her up, drugged her up, and dropped her off. Angelica reported this to the police.
Oh, yeah.
And no follow-up was done. Yeah. And there's been speculation that some of the local law enforcement may have been involved.
Yeah, Angelica, so this version of the story that I heard was that Angelica was picked up by an off-duty police officer. Yeah. He told her to make a police report, and she said she didn't want to. And at that point, nothing else was done.
And I heard a slightly different version. Like I've said, there's a lot of conflicting information surrounding what kind of went on. But she was picked up by a police officer, and law enforcement did not believe her and did not follow up on her claims.
Unfortunately, Angie did eventually die of a drug overdose, so she was never able to testify against David Parker Ray. Though she had at that point every intention to. But so Angie is caught and released, And then we get to Cynthia, and this is where shit gets real.
For real, for real.
For real, for real. So Cynthia Vigil is a drug addict. She is a heroin addict. She's a sex worker. She's very young. She's a baby. She's 21.
Yep, very young.
But, you know, she had a hard life, and that's where
David comes in.
She was out working, and David approached her, and was she trying to buy drugs or trying to solicit? I can't remember.
She was trying to solicit, and I think it was he offered her money for oral sex, but she had to come into his trailer, in his RV.
Now remember, we just told you a little bit ago that he had a uniform because he worked at the state park. So he eventually uses this to convince her he was a police officer.
Yes.
And she was...
Under arrest,
yeah. Sorry, I was trying to remember if I was getting that correct. But then, you know, she is approached by the girlfriend, Cindy. And essentially, was she attacked? Did she attack her, or did she cuff her?
Yes, Cindy attacked her, and they cuffed her and put a dog collar on her.
Yeah, and threw her in the back of the trailer.
So then, of course, Cynthia was tortured for several days, kept chained like a dog inside their trailer. And this is where it really gets interesting.
Yeah, Cynthia, fucking kudos to this bitch. She was like, you know what?
Fuck this shit.
Fuck these people.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
So David Parker Ray has to go to work.
As you do.
As you do. You can't be raping and pillaging forever. So he leaves Cynthia with his girlfriend, Cindy. And Cindy gets a phone call. They're in the actual house now. They're not in the toy box. And Cindy gets a phone call from a friend and is making a tuna sandwich in the other room. And at this point in time, she sets down the keys to the
padlocks.
And she does this subconsciously and doesn't even realize that she's put them down within reach
of
to Cynthia.
And Cynthia, bless her heart,
does everything she can.
And you know what? She does get those keys.
She gets the keys, but unfortunately, fucking Cindy walks out right as she's almost got them, and all hell ensues.
And you know what Cynthia did? Kudos to this bitch. She stabbed Cindy in the neck with an ice pick.
I bet that had to feel fucking amazing.
Oh, hell yeah, I'm sure it did. Picture this. Cynthia stabs Cindy in the neck with an ice pick. Straight, hiya, in the fucking neck. Is running down the street, butt-ass naked, with a dog collar and chains attached to her.
And nobody stops to fucking help her.
Nobody stops to help her. Eventually, she makes it to a neighbor's house, runs in, and this neighbor's like, what the fuck?
What is happening?
And immediately calls the police, where she's taken to the hospital.
Well, before the police get there, she's hiding under the table, screaming to not let him get her.
So sad.
Fucking.
So they take her to the hospital, and people are hesitant to believe her because
she's a drug addict.
She's a sex worker. Well, lo and behold, guess who walks on into the emergency room because she's been stabbed by an ice pick?
Fucking
Cindy. And Cynthia starts screaming that that's her. She's the accomplice. She's the one who was helping hold her hostage. And the police finally believe her.
Now the officers are going back to the house.
Yes.
Like, they had been called out there, and they actually pass Cindy and David on the way there, and some of the officers knew David and waved at him. We're like, hi, buddy, as they fucking passed, going the other direction.
So they roll up, and they're like, oh, nothing to see here, until they enter the toy box.
Until they enter the toy box.
And then, holy shit, can y'all stop ignoring this now?
Yeah. Now they're searching for Cindy and David, and they don't get very far. They catch them. Oh, no. But they have an excuse as to why they did kidnap and shackle
They were trying to help her get sober.
And she needed to be shackled to get through the worst of her heroin addiction.
Fortunately for Cynthia, her wounds and evidence on her body supported her story more than theirs.
Yeah, and then once you got to the toy box, there was just no refuting.
There was no way
Yeah, it wasn't happening.
you could get around that.
So at this point, they are taken in for questioning. And what I've heard was it didn't take very long for Cindy to turn on.
No, Cindy turned on him in 2 fucking seconds. She was like, yep, this is what we did. Mm-hmm. But, to be fair, she did all of this in order to get a plea deal.
Yes. Which she did.
She only got 30 years, was it? No, it was less than that. It was like 9 years.
Yeah, something ridiculous.
But she only served like 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
This is 1999 when he finally got caught. He started in 1956 and did not get caught until 1999.
As much as you would think that, oh God, they've got all this evidence, this is a total gotcha case. This was a gotcha moment. It fucking wasn't, because he was able to explain away so many things. And when you're talking about the defendant, what he was gonna set up with his attorney was they were going to paint the witnesses, which was the victims, as drug addicts, as
prostitutes who were paid to be there.
Yeah, and he was able to manipulate the evidence to kind of make it look that way. Kelly comes back into play.
Yes.
And where the story about how Kelly was dropped off at her mother-in-law's by David Parker Ray. So they're going through all of his possessions, and they're trying to build a case against him and trying to get really solid evidence. But, when you have your 2 best witnesses are both drug addicts, because at this time their 2 best witnesses were Angelica and Cynthia. They didn't know about Kelly at the time. They didn't know who Kelly was.
No. And then
they found the videotape.
Yes.
And the videotape, it amazes me, because I watched a little bit of the videotape. It amazes me that they were able to see Kelly's tattoo in this tape, and that the FBI was able to actually enhance it enough to create a picture to be shared with the news stations and then distributed. Kelly's her former mother-in-law found it on the news. She was the one who saw it and then got a hold of Kelly.
I heard it was Kelly that saw it.
No, I heard that it was...
all the conflicting information with this case.
But, so, regardless, Kelly sees the tattoo and knows that it's hers.
Yes.
And at this point, she has no memory of what happened to her.
Just nightmares.
Just nightmares of being bound, of being tortured, and all these horrible things. So the FBI Kelly gets in touch with the FBI.
Right.
They bring her in for questioning, and they say to her, well, you know about the videotape, right? And she was like, what video?
What videotape? So they show her this videotape. I mean...
Can you fucking imagine?
No, I cannot fucking imagine.
I can't imagine going through something like that, having no memory of it, which in its own fucking weird way might kind of be a blessing.
Yeah.
And then to see it, and it incites the trauma, like your brain fires and recognizes, and then you start remembering.
Yeah.
So it's horrible that she has to remember these things, but
it's
happened.
Also kind of a blessing, because this is what is the nail in his coffin.
Well, almost. So she starts remembering, and now she remembers enough for the state to call her, the prosecution to call her as a witness.
Right.
So they bring her in. Initially, she did not want to testify. She did not want to be a witness on the trial. A lot was riding on her shoulders, and cross-examination of a witness is brutal.
It really is. It's intense.
Like you want to talk about PTSD, this is going to incite such horrible feelings for her.
Oh, absolutely.
So the defense rips her a new one, basically, because there is so much that she doesn't know. Mm-hmm. And in the first trial, her first trial, it ends in a hung jury.
Yep.
I can't, it blows my fucking mind. But yeah, based on the evidence and the testimonies and everything that they had, it's a hung jury. So then they go ahead and go to trial again in a new location with a different judge.
Right.
Because in that trial, the audio recording of him introducing what he's going to be doing to the women was classified as inadmissible in court, and the jurors were not allowed to hear it because they say it wasn't pertinent to the case, which is horseshit, because he says in this, because she couldn't remember, that's why it's not pertinent, they said, but he says specifically in this audio recording that he's going to drug them and they're not going to remember a fucking thing.
Right.
That is what he said.
Literal evidence that he tampered with her memory.
So I can't believe that wasn't admissible in court. But so they go to a new location, new judge, new jury.
Right.
And the new judge is like, yes.
Yes.
I will allow it. And they come out and he's convicted. He gets 224 years.
Yes.
For both girls. Unfortunately, he didn't get anything for Angelica because she had passed away from an overdose at this time.
But he gets kidnapping, sexual assault.
Like 20-some accounts of...
Oh, I mean, they just ripped him, and he got 224 years, which obviously he's never going to be able to serve. And at this point, he's, 69 years old?
Yeah, something like that.
That rat bastard has a heart attack on his way to an interrogation to tell the police officers what he did with the bodies of his other victims.
He died in a holding cell, and he never served a day of his sentence. This is actual sentence.
1 day. He'd passed away in 2002 after the trial, right after he had been sentenced, when he was supposed to be going to tell the police what he did with the bodies of his remaining victims.
So all we have now are his journals and the things that his daughter and his ex-girlfriend Cindy and all of them have said. Let's talk a little bit about the psychology. Serial killers, you're doing a gigantic disservice by generalizing them. They are very unique, bizarre creatures, but there are some trends,
some similarities
and stuff that they do share. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about all of that. So what we've learned about David is that
we really can't discount the level of abuse that he endured, because that really probably is why he was so into sadism.
Let's tick him off here. His father was an abusive alcoholic. His mother was mostly absent after their divorce. She was potentially a drug addict. He was abandoned by both of his parents. He bounced between care of different family members. Even when he was with his grandparents, his grandfather was very strict and had a physical type of discipline. His grandmother was kind of cold and not extra loving. And then his grandmother died when he was a young man as well.
Right.
His aunt began to sexually abuse him before he was 15, and the kind of stuff that she was doing was
masochism.
He was introduced to BDSM pornography at a very young age, and at the age of 10, children don't have the emotional maturity or the necessary mental faculties to understand what is safe, let alone to understand what is healthy or consensual. So, based on that experience, to him, sex equated to like
pain,
non-consensual pain and torture. That was normal sex to him. And you can see he had 4 marriages and 4 divorces. He was unable to form meaningful and loving relationships with women. Serial killers have organized or disorganized as a category, and he was very organized. He was
very
meticulous.
Organized.
Everything nothing he did, at least based upon what we've seen, was impulsive. Everything was pretty well thought out.
Even his first rape, really.
He'd been planning it for forever.
He'd been planning it.
For years. As a child. As a fucking child.
I mean, I can't even wrap my brain around that. Like,
no, me. So, killers can be put into these subcategories of mission-oriented, visionary, power and control, and hedonistic, which hedonistic has comfort-oriented, lust, thrill, seeker, that kind of stuff. He kind of falls into the hedonistic because of the lust kills.
Let's be fair here. We don't know that he's a serial killer.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
But we know he is a serial rapist and torturer.
Is a serial killer. Debish is a serial killer.
Oh, I have no doubt that he murdered probably most of the women that he interacted with. And if he didn't kill them, I believe he put them into sex trafficking, which would have killed them anyway.
Yeah, for sure. He was only convicted of 2 rapes.
Right. They couldn't pin any murders on him. Keep that in mind. Not one single murder could they 100% definitively pin on him, because when they did go to search his toy box, there was no physical evidence of women being there, aside from the journal entries
and some video and
pictures. Apart from that, there was no evidence that a woman had ever been in there.
I did a little research to see if he was diagnosed with anything. Well, he wasn't really diagnosed with anything. The only notes that were made about his psychological evaluation was that he was a sexual sadist and he had paraphilia, which is the same thing, basically.
Oh, yeah.
But he did, so mementos is another thing. A lot of serial killers keep trophies, mementos, souvenirs, or nothing at all.
Did you find the FBI website?
No.
There, if you Google him, there's an FBI website, and they have 401 pictures of artifacts that were found in his toy box. And it's all like jewelry, underwear, stuff like that.
That's what I have a note that he kept trophies. They categorized them as trophies, not souvenirs. And it was jewelry, like rings and necklaces and that kind of stuff.
If you Google him, there's an FBI website, and you can see all the pictures of the things that he had kept.
He did belong, supposedly, to the local church of satanic worship. He considered himself satanic.
You can be a part of the Church of Satan and not be into BDSM.
Yeah.
And you can also be into BDSM and not be with the Church of Satan.
I can't emphasize enough that normal, everyday functioning people are satanic and are into BDSM. This isn't something that creepy people just do.
No, not at all. I mean, you can be a Satanist and be a normal, functioning, healthy member of society.
If you're not, some people that might come to a shock to hear is they can't wrap their brains around that sort of thing. But girl, you need to educate yourself on subcultures in America and around the world.
There are other religions.
Satanism is not always dancing around a pentagram and worshiping the devil.
No. If we're gonna dance naked, that's the pagans.
Well, yeah, I mean, technically any non-Abrahamic religion is paganism, but satanic falls into that. Yeah. But anyways, talking about
religion. That one was so heavy.
That was so heavy.
And we focused really heavily on the psychology.
We did.
And
the facts. But that one, actually, to be fair, for our first one, that one was so fucking fact heavy.
It was really, really fact heavy. So, Christina.
Yes.
On the Dahmer scale.
Oh, I'm so glad that you remembered.
Where do you rate David Parker Ray?
If he killed 30 to 60 women, like what is suspected, very suspect, then 8 out of 10, Jeffries.
You're going to give him 8? I'm going with 6.
Yeah, I mean, if he didn't actually kill them, then I can totally agree to the 6. But that was heavy, and we need a palate cleanser. So I'm going to play some smooth jazz, and we going to get our vibe on. Palate cleanser. This is the palate cleanser. Sorry, she said no singing.
I'm about to sing, so.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Go ahead.
Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but I'm Ted Bundy. Crowbar.
I knew it was coming, but sorry. Okay, keep going.
Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my basement. I'm John Wayne Gacy.
Those are so fucked up. So guys, how this is going to work moving forward is if there are some major serial killers that you would like us to cover.
Or some minor serial killers.
And some minor serial killers.
Yeah.
And then hometown killers. So if you are from Ohio or North Carolina and you have a serial killer to recommend to us,
by all means. Throw it our way.
And then the last category that we're going to do is bitches who kill.
Women and murder.
Women. That will be very interesting whenever. It'll be a couple weeks before we get to our first female killer. So you have plenty of time to recommend one to us.
Heck yeah, because we don't have one to start with, I don't think.
No, we don't have one to start with. So y'all start sending us recommendations. Chelsea put up our Facebook account. We have an Instagram and an email. Chelsea, do you want to drop those again?
Yeah, so if you want to reach out to us, our Instagram is @thekillerT. Our Facebook is also @thekillerT.
Yeah.
Our email is thekillerT@gmail.com. If you have questions, comments,
Personal attacks.
you know, we're open to it.
We're there. We're ready.
We're ready for it. We're here for it.
All right, y'all. So that was The Killer Tea. That was our first episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to all of the diabolical bullshit that we just spent the past hour and a half discussing.
And next week, we will be releasing a very special Halloween episode featuring
None other
than the clown himself.
John Wayne Gacy.
What are some good serial killers that we could mention on the show?
I really, though, for real, like, I want y'all to do, like, your second or third episode on that Vampire Sacramento, because the psychology behind that motherfucker,